The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a long history in this, the cradle of the Restoration. In the 20th century, that history began in 1907, when President George Elbert Smith acquired the Joseph Smith Farm. Then in 1915, Willard and Rebecca Bean and their family were called to live in Palmyra, and in 1917, the Rochester branch was organized as part of the Eastern States Mission. In 1925, the Palmyra branch was organized with Willard Bean as the first branch president. In 1928, the church purchased the Hill Cumorah along with 3 adjacent farms, and in 1939, after 24 years, the Bean family left Palmyra, and at the request of David O. McKay, the family of Merlin and Echo Ellis moved to Palmyra and lived in the Smith home. Glenn Ellis, one of their children, later became a member of the Fairport ward and married Charlotte Spangenberg. In the intervening years, the church in the Rochester area grew slowly, and the foundation was laid for the great work here. By 1944, there were 3 branches in the Rochester district. Then in 1947, Martin J. Seebach, a key figure in the growth of the church here, came to Rochester as a student at RIT. By 1952, the Democrat and Chronicle reported 165 members living in the Rochester area. During the late 1950s through the 1960s and 70s, the Lord brought a steady stream of members from the West, many to work for Kodak and Xerox. These people blended their talents and strengths with both the stalwart members already living here and the marvelous converts who joined the church during those years. These families and many others laid the foundation of caring, service, and sacrifice that has been the tradition of Fairport through the years. In January 1961, the Palmyra Chapel was dedicated by President David O. McKay, and in 1962, the Cumorah stake was organized. At that time, the Rochester ward had about 504 members. In June 1964, K. R. Whitmore became bishop of the Rochester ward, and on October of that year, the first chapel in Rochester on Reservoir Avenue was dedicated. By 1965, the Rochester ward split into Rochester First Ward with Martin Seebach as bishop and the Rochester Second Ward with K. Whitmore as bishop. Then in September 1969, the Rochester First Ward was split and the Fairport Ward was created on the eastern side of Rochester with H. Don Moyer as bishop. The new ward had 337 members. By 1971, Doyle Robison was called as bishop of the Fairport ward and served until he was called into the stake presidency of the Cumorah stake in July 1973. K. Whitmore was then called as bishop. In May 1974, Bishop Whitmore accepted a Sloan Fellowship at MIT. He and his family moved to Boston, and Donald J. Woolley became bishop. On September 9, 1974, the groundbreaking for this building was held. Some of you here tonight were at that event. An incredible number of hours that stretched over many months were spent on fundraising projects to raise the funds needed to build this chapel. That same month in 1974, the Cumorah stake was also divided and Rochester, New York stake was formed, with Doyle Robison as president. Then, on November 7, 1976, this building we are in tonight was dedicated by President Dale S. Dallin, then president of the Rochester, New York stake and later first president of the Palmyra Temple. In November 1979, Rollo E. Black became bishop. Then on April 20, 1980, Fairport ward was divided with John W. Gwynn called as bishop of Fairport and Rollo Black called as bishop of the newly formed Pittsford ward. In building the new chapel, the ward members had grown so close in their love for each other that for many it was a very difficult division and transition. But we survived. We also went on the consolidated schedule that month. In June 1985, the Rochester, New York stake was split and the Rochester, New York Palmyra stake was formed. Fairport became part of that stake. Later, in October 2002, the name of the stake was changed to the Palmyra, New York stake. In June 1986, Thomas B. Brighton, the great building fund project provider, was called as bishop. Then in April 1988, Wayne A. Lehman became bishop. It was during his service as bishop that the Fairport ward celebrated its 20th anniversary in September 1989. An impressive celebration was held that night. In 1994, Gordon Dickens became bishop, and during 1995, this building was closed for major renovations. Fairport ward met in Rochester First Ward Chapel in Irondequoit for many months. In July 1999, Kevin Clausen was called as bishop. On April 6, 2000, the Palmyra Temple was dedicated, something that Clara Mae Zimmer had long predicted and urged us to pray for. Then, in September 2005, James E. Bram, our current bishop, began his service. Tonight, September 19, 2009, the Fairport Ward celebrates its 40th anniversary. As we celebrate this anniversary, let us pause to remember and thank those valiant saints who came before us in Cumorah, whose labors and love for the Lord, His church, and this area of the vineyard lighted the way for all of us today. May the memories made through the years and the testimonies built bless you and your families now and for generations to come.